And welcome back, and we're about to move on into our second segment for the morning.
And of course, as we mentioned, December 9th is celebrated across the globe as International Anti-Corruption Day. And here to have a conversation with us about their role and how they commemorate this day is the president of the Public Service Union, Doreth Obermayer Cayetano. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
It's nice. It's actually nice to have you in, Doreth. You know, we know for a fact that you've been all over the news over the past few, but nonetheless, International Anti-Corruption Day, December 9th. Let's venture off.
Well, before that, you have been in the news, and we do want an update in terms of the last we heard from you, you had a meeting with the Prime Minister about the sale of the building where the union was housed. What is the update there?
Well, the update is basically we had our meeting, like what you mentioned, with the PM. And so we came out with a direction as to what is it that we want to take. And with that, we had to go back to our membership, which we have done. And so presently, our members had given us some mandates that we need to consider with a follow-up meeting with the PM.
Okay.
And are they saying that they are open to moving from the space?
No. Our members are adamant of the fact that we are not going to be moved. Basically saying that since we have occupied the premises for some 17 plus years and certain investment had been done, they don't think that the right thing would be for us to just up and move.
Okay.
Now, I mean, what are the options that you have on the table at this point? The building has been sold.
At this point, we don't really have any option, and those are some of the things that we are going to go and discuss with the PM when we do our follow-up meeting.
When is that scheduled for?
We haven't set a date as yet, but we do plan to send a letter for the request of that meeting.
How optimistic are you that you will be able to resolve this issue?
Well, I am highly optimistic that something good is going to come out of it at the end of the day.
You know, I just wanted to segue a little because one of the things people should understand that not because you've got people in power that you're supposed to just be laid back and just accept what comes to you. And Doreth, for me and for a lot of people in our country, putting up a fight is exactly how we're supposed to live our lives. And I find this as a good example of leadership, how important it is. And I really want for you to jump on this for me. How important is it for people to stand up and fight for what they believe in?
I think it's very much important as it relates to, especially if you know that you have grounds in whatsoever it is that you are adamant that belongs to you, then I believe you ought to stand up and fight. Even though the fight might be long and hard, I believe at the end of the day, the victory would come once you stand your grounds and believe that this is what you want, this is what it's rightfully deserving of you, for you, and at the end of the day, you can just stand up. The minute you don't stand up, then they trample over you. Then they take advantage of you, and that needs to stop.
All right, so let's shift gears to Anti-Corruption Day. And, you know, I want to start off this conversation by saying one thing very clear. It's been 2 years? 2016, is that?
Yes.
Yeah, 2 years since the signing of the United Nations Convention on Anti-Corruption, and that had been a long time push. There's been a push for a very long time to get the government to sign on.
Agree.
There had been, I'm aware because I did attend some sensitization processes that took place. There's been a body that's been put together. There were the technical advisors that came in. But in terms of tangible results or implementation processes, well, it's not been I think as quick a process as many had hoped. Now, I ask very clearly, just in terms of setting where you fit in this conversation, what is the role of the PSU in the implementation of the UNCAC?
Okay, the role of not only the PSU, but the National Trade Union Congress of Belize, which is the umbrella union for 10 of our trade unions within the country. We do have a representative that sits on the UNCAC, and that individual attends meetings, they attend trainings and seminars. At the inception, they were also invited to travel abroad, that was to Jamaica, to see what was happening there at the time, and how is it that they believe the implementation can take place within Belize. Now, you did make mention of the visit of the two review, the two countries that came to do the revision for the Belize. And basically they were looking at what is it that we have as it relates to our laws, as it relates to our legislations, and how that going to be enforced. And if there's anything that we're short in, then how is it that we can implement and embed it into what is it that we have right now. I know that review had been completed, and it's with the government for them to now sit with the committee and then gives a feedback. So that's where we are with that.
Now, the commemoration of this day is a very important one, and I think we talk broadly about corruption in this country, and there's so many different facets of it and so many ways that it happens, and very little do we pay attention to the impact. But while it's easy to talk about the players, the big players, whether it is people who are politically connected, business entities, foreign entities, there's a very important role of the public service as well. And in fact, it can be argued that without public service, a lot of what we deem as corrupt practices could not happen. How do you respond to that?
Well, it has a role as it relates to getting the work done. The public service or the public officers are the forefront of most of the government, not most, all, sorry, of the government ministries and department. Now, when it comes down to corruption, it has, where the union fits into that is the concept of looking at making certain that the employee wage is proper, right? That they, whatsoever remuneration that is considered for the job done, that it's reasonable. And that in itself is one aspect of where the union comes in, because at the end of the day, we represent these employees. And so we make sure that when we do collective bargaining agreements, or when we do sit down around the table to negotiate, that we consider all of these. Because the minute the public officer is not remunerated accordingly, that leaves room for corruption to happen. So in that case, that's where the union, us as the public service union, plays a vital role in seeing to that this is done. And
I, you know, I think I hear your point in terms of being paid sufficiently, that you're not tempted to be involved in corrupt activities. But there is also the challenge of job security. And we hear so often from people in public service talking about victimization, or sometimes it's not being fired, it's being shifted, you know, mid-year to some, what we would consider some placement like a Timbuktu. But what is the message from the union to members that they also have a very vital role in fighting corruption?
Yes, they do. Our public officers are vital in fighting corruption, because then you have what we refer to as the Whistleblowers Act. That, again, is important. We haven't really enacted that as yet. It's a work in progress as it relates to, for us to look at the Whistleblowers Act. That is going to help our members in coming forth, because right now it's just, you know what, taking that risk of coming forth to say that a corruption is happening or report a corruption within their department or ministry. But what is there to cover that individual? We don't have anything as such.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leaves room for, you know what, not getting the information, because no one going to risk their jobs to say, you know what, I am going to report it, but then what then going to become of me
Yeah.
Yeah.
as an employee at the end. So
But looking
How
at
does
the,
it work in terms of public service regulations when I am an employee in whatever department? We won't use any specific example. But I am told to execute something outside of my duty, something that I know is not within the mandate of what I'm supposed to do. But then you always hear people say, well, the minister told me to do it, or
Yeah.
the minister driver told me to do it, or some other political person instructed me to do so.
we always say we are governed by regulations, right? Within the public service, we have several regulations that governs us. We have the stores order, we have the financial orders, we have the Audit and Reform Act, and we also have our regulations that would direct who can give orders. No minister, no political somebody can come and say, you are supposed to do X, Y, Z. No. Individuals get order from their AOs. And so at the end of the day, there is what we call a guiding factor in how and what our public officers are supposed to do.
So that's the theory. But you would agree that the practical, the real life execution of duties in the departments doesn't necessarily fit with what you just
Yes.
explained.
To some extent, yes. And those are some of the areas that we're trying to correct in enforcing some of our regulations. Because then again, because of the loophole and the period of our regulation, certain things had changed and we haven't updated our regulations. So yes, those going to leave some loopholes in areas where things going to go not according to what is stipulated within these regulations.
But that's where things are always segued, because when it comes to the loopholes, that for them is actually the most attractive part of it. When it comes to corruption, like you mentioned, yes, there is a trickle down effect. There is a trickle down effect. So if the minister or whosoever in power would say this is what you've got to do, a lot of folks would say, you know what, I'll just jump on the bandwagon, especially because of the financial part of it. So in light of that, how, especially for you being the president, how do we work along this line? Because yes, we've got whistleblowers. So at times, these whistleblowers are the people who would eventually want to take the financial aspect of things. How are you working along with this?
Currently, we're not working in addressing corruption as in terminology corruption. But what we try to do is make sure that we enhance our members in letting them know what the regulation stipulates, right? And then we go from there, because I believe once they are aware and they know what they can and cannot do, they will be able to understand that, you know what, if I do the don't, then there are repercussions at the end of the day. And
Are they
so
protected under the PSU? If I am a clerk somewhere and I'm asked to prepare a document or without what was required, and I'm being told, maybe not by my AO, but by the political power in that particular ministry, I may be a junior employee, I may be a public service union member, can I say no to them and be protected under the PSU?
you can say no. One of the things I ask our officers to do is to always document. Because with documentation, then we have proof, we have evidence. Those are situations that the union can then say, you know what, we can fight those. When it's just verbal, it makes it a little bit more challenging for us to say, you know what, we will be able to fight this. It's going to be based on your words against mine, right? But if they are...
But how do you document? I mean, if I am a junior employee, I can't go back to, if it is a minister, and say, send me that in email.
Yeah.
send me that no, but then you can send the email then. Based on the information, okay, today, what? December 5th, you had asked me to do X, Y, Z, you know, because now you are protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And so based on, you can include the time, you know, the specification of what it was that was assigned for you to do. And basically, how, if you did carry it through, how did you went about getting that task done?
No, but you work in public service. And I'm not being hard. I just think the problem is that I think we have a problem with corruption that we've almost normalized. Like it just is the way it is. And there has to be a shift in thinking and a shift in culture and a shift in courage even in standing up and sending that email for documentation or refusing to do something or blowing the whistle. But we haven't really seen it. And, you know, I think a lot of people depend on the government leaders to be the ones to say, you know, now we will have an anti-corruption mandate. And yes, they get elected on platforms like that. But the action never follows through. So if I were to say the hope would lie in our public service because they are the ones who are needed to execute so much of what we see the higher powers getting away with.
That is to some extent true, but like what the United Nations Convention Against Corruption speaks of is that each and every public person has a responsibility to play as it relates to fighting corruption, right? We have the individual. After the individual comes the organizations. The organizations comes the communities. And then it follows till it reaches the entire country. And so it starts from you basically educating a child. And that's where I believe that we need to start the direction. We need to start from an early age, educating our people in anti-corruption or corruption in a whole. What is corruption? And how do we address corruption? Because like what you rightfully said, it tends to become something normalized. You know, like it's all okay, but it's not, because it has several effects on the country, on the people. For example, health-wise, right? We will look at health as one of the most important service to any individual within a country. But then let's look at how corruption affects the medications we receive, right? The quality. I mean, all of that. And at the end of the day, who does it affect? It doesn't only affect the people who are at the top. It affects all of us. It goes from the bottom all the way to the top. And so that's the direction we are to take in educating our people. Because we have to show how the child gets affected and how even the adults get affected. The people in the private sector gets affected in that. The people in the government sector gets affected in that, right? Because when you're saying that you are going to buy certain medication, you have to make sure that the medication is exactly what it's supposed to be and not a
generic one.
Yes, exactly.
But it will eventually become. It has to start in the next generation, and I'll tell you this. I'll tell you why I think that is because it's nearly culturally. I might be wrong in saying this, but it's nearly a culture for us to just turn a blind eye to things that are not working or should not be working the way that it is at that particular point. And then I wanted to ask, especially when it comes to UNCAC, it has not been signed as yet. It
has been signed.
It has been signed.
It has been signed, but it hasn't been ratified.
Or the implementation process has not been in as yet. Now, as the president of the PSU and your union, do you think that this is taking too long? And what is being done to try and get the process in?
Well, there are times that it might take longer. I have seen countries that takes 6-7 years before they ratify, right? Because of what might need to be implemented or embedded in the laws or yes, the laws, the legislations for a country. With Belize, I think we are somewhat closer to it as long as the enforcement is there. And I think that's where we are failing, in the fact of enforcing and seeing to it that the UNCAC, the committee that is formed, actually start to do what needs to be done. I know the review had been done. It was sent to government. Now where is it?
Yeah.
Right? Those are some of the things that we need to make sure that the public is aware of this. Because it's not out. Like,
and isn't it the case that government chooses whether or not it can be a public document? The review?
The review should have, probably after they would have received it for, I would want to believe, about 2 weeks. You know, then they were supposed to make sure that they meet with the committee to share with them what came out of the review. And then how do they move forward from there?
John spoke of a culture, and I know we have other things, because you do have recommendations, and you're talking about the Inter-American Convention. But before we just generally, because there has to be a message, I think, to the public, and we all have to do our part in educating that. It's almost like making people care that we exist amidst quite a bit of corruption. It's not saying that everything about the country is bad, but we've just turned a blind eye to things that perhaps we don't need to. From your standpoint, as a union leader, as advocate for change, how would you explain to people why they should care about the type of corruption that we see in the country, and about their potential involvement or ignoring the problem?
One of the reasons why we ought to care is because then if we just continue living this way and not paying attention to the number and the level of corruption that is happening within our country, it affects our economy, it affects our livelihood, and then based on those, it creates far more fraud to what is already is. Not only that, you have crime, a high increase in crime. You have, we talk about human trafficking. All of those are aspects as it relates to corruption. We look at the entire populace when it's election time to say, you know what, we're going to go and vote. And we have heard, I don't have proof, but we have heard that, you know what, individual is paid to cast his or her vote, right? That's a huge aspect of corruption that doesn't give the country its legal representation, but one that is corrupt in putting that individual there, if that is actually happening. And so it's one whereby we need to make sure that we continue to try our utmost best in educating our people for them to see what are the effects to each and every one of us within this country with that corruption cast on us.
Wow.
That's I think what we need to be reminded of so often. Let's shift gears though, because I know as a part of this conversation, there is an update in terms of work that the PSU and NTUCB has in recommendations in anti-corruption, but from a different entity.
Yes, that's the Mississippi, or the follow-up mechanism.
Okay.
And for the implementation of Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. And this is Inter-American mechanism of the OAS.
Okay.
Right? This mechanism looks at 33 of the 34 country states that are part of the OAS.
Okay.
And basically, this sort of mechanism is one that's a little different, a little much lighter than the UNCAC. The UNCAC is an overall aspect of the country. The Mississippi looks at more the aspect of our legal framework as well as the status of one's country and what is it that they have in place. Mainly how we are governed and how we go about doing business and so forth.
And so we have, these are things that have been done.
Yes.
This is how you have put together around a number of recommendations, right? And these are recommendations that you're going to put forward to government.
These recommendations, we have already done the presentations on this. This was basically the hiring and the remuneration within the public service. And so when we had the follow-up, the fifth review, which took place this year, April, this year, we did the presentation to the representatives from the OAS. So these recommendations are already put in place. The report had already been sent out as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And where are we since you've presented your recommendations?
Well, for the ones that we are aware of as it relates to, I'm glad that you brought it up, the open vote workers regulations. We are, as a Joint Staff Relations Council, we are looking at how is it that we can regularize the public officers who are under the open vote capacity or unestablished public officers, and we want to see how best we can get them established, or at least their post. Not the individual, but the post itself.
Can we just jump into that a little bit? I feel like we talk about open vote workers every time, you know, a union member is here, or we're talking about corruption or challenges in government systems. Why has this been a consistent area of concern by the union? What are the implications of open vote workers within the government system?
I think it has a lot to do with the overall benefit a public officer would receive. In the past, open vote workers were, when it's time for them to retire, they would have been considered under the labor law. Recently, a couple of years back, they have regularized that, and so now open vote workers, similar to established public officers, are able to receive the gratuity after 10 years and gratuity and pension after 15 years. Before, that wasn't the case. Now, while open vote workers is key for us as a public officer, because then you want what we refer to as job security, in the sense that, you know what, I can't just decide that I am fed up of dealing with you, and there is little I have done to try to correct your wrongs, and then I just, as the head of department or CEO, sorry, can just write and dismiss you. And that's just one of the risks that our open vote workers face, that they can just write and dismiss them without
cause.
Yes, without any cause. Outside of that, there are other little benefits, you know, like that established officers receive that open vote workers don't receive. Example, getting time off to further your studies or getting study leave. They're not entitled to that because they're under the capacity of unestablished or open vote workers.
Wow.
Right? So it is of importance to us as a union, because we always believe that our public officers, when you join the service, that there is always room for upward mobility. There is always a room for individuals to go and further their studies, you know, on their own, and hoping that they would grant them maybe the 4 hours for the week, right? Or at least apply for study leave so that they can go further their studies. Our open vote workers are not entitled to those.
Wow.
Now, there are quite a number of recommendations that have been put forward, and unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through all of them. But I want to ask you, given the platform that you have now, if you could prioritize maybe the top 2 or 3 that you really feel would help in having us move towards a less corrupt system, what would that be?
Yeah.
My priority would be campaign. We have to do the continuous campaign against corruption. And like what I mentioned earlier, this is from child to adolescent. You know, that for me, because that's where it starts. We can't say, no, we are going to educate our public, general public, but then we still left out the child.
Yes.
You understand? So that for me is a must. The other thing that I would want to see from the public service union aspect is that we as a union and everyone else that's supposed to play their role start to play their role. That we start to do what it is that we ought to do in order for us to minimize. I don't think we can actually eliminate it, but to minimize the number and level of corruption that we are facing.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Fair enough.
we thank you for coming in and reminding us once again why we need to stay focused on what was a very intense push. I mean, remember there were the teachers union came out, the other unions were speaking out to get the UNCAC signed, to get a shift towards being serious on changing a culture of corruption. And from what we're hearing with your recommendations that you've put forward, it continues.
Yes, it certainly does.
Thank you very much, Doreth.
Thank you too for having me this morning.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get the details of the new LiDAR system through the Climate Change, Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the 5 Cs. So stay tuned.